Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual event with Orbit Live and two great fantasy authors. Fonda is the author of the World Fantasy Award-winning novel Jade City and the sequel Jade War, and Luke Arnold is the author of The Last Smile in Sunder City. They'll be talking about their books, about crime novels and magical worlds, and also answering your questions. First, some quick logistics. This event is being recorded, and after it concludes, you'll be able to watch the replay and share it with your friends using the same Crowdcast event link you used to enter. As I said, Fonda and Luke will be talking to each other about their books, but also answering your questions. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see an Ask a Question button. You can enter your questions there and also vote on your fellow attendees' questions so that the most popular questions are the first to get answered. Last but not least, follow us on Crowdcast to be notified about future Orbit Live events. We have some exciting ones coming up, including one next week with science fiction authors Tade Thompson and James S. A. Corey. And now, without further ado, I'm pleased to turn the event over to Fonda and Luke. Welcome, Fonda and Luke.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just checking. Fonda, are you getting an echo or is that just me?
I think that's just you, Luke. I'm okay.
That was in there, but I'm just putting my headphones in and out. We'll see how that goes. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Fonda, good to chat.
Likewise. Good to meet you, Luke.
Yeah. I am getting a weird echo, but I'll try not to let that throw me off. Don't know what happened.
You sound okay on my end, so hopefully it's fine with everyone else. If anyone else is getting a weird echo, they can put it in the comments, but you sound okay to me.
Great. That's what matters. All right. Yeah, I guess we'll just kick things off and we'll start getting through some of these questions. Thank you, everyone who wrote a question before now, but everyone keep throwing them in there. Okay, so I'll go with one from Ishika for both. Currently, a lot is going on in the world. A lot. Has this had an effect on your attitudes towards writing? And do you have any advice for those of us who are struggling to be creative? Thank you.
I feel like I've had multiple conversations with like every writer friend that I've had about this. I don't know about you, Luke, but we're all in this weird new world where we're constantly looking at the stuff that's going on around us and being like, how do I write in this environment right now? When it comes to like advice for people who are struggling right now, I will say that it has been a struggle for me too. So first of all, if you're a creative person and you're, a writer, artist, actor, and right now you just feel like you are totally drained and it's really hard to be creative, just know that you are not alone. Everyone who does this professionally is feeling it on some level. For me, I have done a few things that I actually started off this year thinking like this would be a great thing for me to do. And they have ended up really helping me and saving me. And I'm on book deadline right now. I have a book due this summer. And so, I can't be like, you know what, I'm just going to kind of cocoon for 3 months, which is what I feel like doing a lot.
Yeah.
Like it'd be nice to roll into the fetal position, but I can't do that. So there's one thing I started earlier this year was habit tracking. And I just got this journal and I wrote down half a dozen habits that I wanted to try and cultivate on like a daily basis. And they would be like, write for this amount of time, read or enjoy myself for 30 minutes, get 30 minutes of exercise, get to bed by a decent hour. So every week I would come up with like a few things I wanted to try and do, like on sort of the philosophy that like, if I can get into habits that I can check off, because I really, really love to-do lists. And being able to check those off really helps me to stop the other bad habit of just doom scrolling through the news and through Twitter. So that's one. And then the other is I started a gratitude journal where every day I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm just going to write down, it's going to take me 5 minutes. I'm going to write down a few things that I was glad for today. And they could be like, I actually, finished this chapter that I was working on, or it could be like, I got takeout food. So those few things have helped me, but I have to say it is definitely hard. I'm fortunately in revision. And so, it's a little easier for me to focus on something that I've already written as opposed to trying to generate something completely new. How about you?
Yeah, so I'm kind of in the opposite. I am not under any deadlines or anything at the moment. So that means that it was very weird because, I started the year with a few things I thought I'd work on, a few things that I thought I knew where I'd put my mind. And this is just crazy, one thing after another. And a weird thing is a lot of our carrots have been taken away, like the little rewards that we thought we'd get. For me, I can do a really good day's work often, or like work through the week if I know like on the weekend I get to see people, or that's when I know when my social life's coming, and that makes it easier to sit alone for so long. And so with those things taken away, I think it is really hard. And so I think for me, what I ended up doing was when I realized that the things I thought I should be writing weren't really matching up with where my mind was focusing, I kind of let my creative mind go down those tracks. And that was by having the freedom to, not have to write anything in particular. I was able to find those things that were keeping me up at night, or those things that were really interesting me, or feeling how I responded to something I read, something I was learning, and see where that went. And rather than try and force myself to write the things that I was, coming up with those questions, like getting confused, like, okay, why is this important now? Or will this still make sense when we've gone through this huge moment that we're going through right now? That was kind of my way of, of kind of dealing with it for me in this weird place I'm at where there are so many different things I could be working on. And sometimes that can be the thing that stops you which is my usual thing to go like, focus on what keeps you up at night. Like if there's that thing that's really capturing your mind, and also, it's weird with the Sunder City books, because the first book's actually kind of about someone who is so kind of full of guilt and confusion about what he can do to help that he is very bad at doing anything. And so it has been interesting, a lot of, once again, taking note of my feelings at this time. And even if I haven't gone through them yet, there's definitely a lot here that I'll be able to stuff into Fetch's next adventure.
Yeah, as I was reading your book, Luke, I felt like a lot of Fetch's feelings about just like the state of the world and his sense of guilt and what can I possibly do in the face of all these things that are wrong and I'm just one human being, really resonated at this time. It's like every time you read a piece of literature, you engage with a creative work, I think you're bringing your time and place and your situation into it.
Which is interesting because I love books out there about people who see what's going on, but think about it, decide what they've got to do and launch into action and know their place. But it's, especially now, I think we're all going through a lot of feelings, especially those of us who feel like, we've been playing a part of it in a system that's been doing a lot of damage, and to feel like, how do I flip around and now start to be a positive force in the world when I still don't quite understand all the elements that I've contributed to it? Am I ready to face that yet? Yeah, that was it. It definitely feels like a lot of people might be going through some of those feelings Fetch went through.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So that's a pretty good segue to the next question I think I'll throw out to you, Luke, which is, thinking about those things, what's one thing that you're proud of, in particular, a scene or a character or a line of dialogue even?
Ooh.
And this is a question from Taylor.
Great. Thank you, Taylor. It's interesting. It's funny. I saw another one there that might come asking like things we thought we've got better at, and things we didn't do as well. That's maybe something that's easier to answer than this one. But I do think, I guess what I'm proud of is some of the moments of finding a lot of my truth that I was able to maybe put into Fetch, and kind of, it maybe when I was a younger writer would like, maybe it would become too indulgent, and you go like, oh, this is just how I'm feeling right now, and this is really important. And it's really lovely as a writer when you get to moments when you kind of recognize feelings you might have had or thoughts you might have had with enough distance to be able to place them on a character without then explaining everything, but letting it sit there with a bit of knowledge gained over life. And so that's kind of what I do kind of enjoy about Fetch in the first book is that there's a lot of me in there, but I have got, without condemning him or making it too obvious, what's being said here, been able to also add a few little hints about how I feel about maybe younger me now that I've done a bit of growing up. What about you?
Oh,
there's
gosh.
a lot to be proud of in these books, by the way. I'm halfway through Jade War and just absolutely loving it.
Oh, thanks. I think I read your book in like less than 24 hours. So you definitely wrote a page turner. It is hard to pin down, one thing in particular, because they suck up so much of your time and your life and your creative energy. I think with the Greenbone Saga books, probably one thing that I'm particularly proud of is having created this family, these characters that people just seem to really feel attached to. Like they feel a sense of just like and it's not necessarily even that they like all the characters, but it's really satisfying to me when readers have their favorite character in this family, and they relate to one of those in particular, or they worry about the characters and they feel traumatized when bad things happen to them. So I just feel like more than any other characters that I've written that I've lived with this family for 6 years in a strange way. Like they feel very real to me, and I'm proud of the fact that seems to translate on the page to readers.
Absolutely. I was very happy when I read one of your interviews saying, when they're asking like, a character you like the most, and you said Hilo, because I immediately loved him, but I was like, what's great about the writing is you're still not sure going, are we gonna be shown that this guy's awful later on? How, like, what's going to be the eventual story here? Because at the beginning, I really I just really liked that we kind of got introduced to him mostly through his POV before we heard other people saying, oh, this guy's a hothead and this and that. It was really lovely to see where he was coming from and how he saw himself before that. So,
it's interesting because you wrote a book that's very much in this one character's head. So the whole story is like you're completely in Fetch's brain. And before I wrote the Greenbone Saga books, I wrote single POV stories as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very uniquely different challenges, because on one hand, when you've got that single POV character, especially one that has a very distinct voice like Fetch does, you have to constrain yourself. Like you've got to give the information to the reader, but you have to filter it through his head. And for me, the joy and the challenge of writing the Greenbone Saga books was that I could have these different characters have different perspectives on each other. So you would see the way, Shay sees herself or the way Hilo sees himself. Yeah. But then you would move to another POV character and get their perspective on that person in that situation that might be different. And so it's kind of like this almost more objective view of the world, as opposed to kind of like the feeling of being, with this character in and day out that you have with a single POV story.
No, I get very jealous of you in moments there. When some of those moments where you got to switch and like see the other side, I'm like, oh, that'd be nice.
I can imagine what other people think of Fetch.
Yes, well, that's it is always nice when someone. I don't want to actually. I won't step on another question because there's one coming up, but I think we'll come back to that kind of point of view thing at a certain point. All right. So this is a question up. Do we do another one? I'll try and pick someone new. Okay, we'll go for it. This is one from Denise here. What do you think? Does a character need to have to be relatable or likable enough that the reader wants to follow the character on the journey?
So I do not think a character has to be likable. And I do think a character has to be interesting. And those things are not necessarily the same. So I have often said, I do not need you to like my characters. I need you to understand them. So even
Yeah.
if you don't agree with what they're doing, or you question their motives or morality or methods, I need you I need, as an author, to have done a good enough job bringing you into that character's headspace and that world that you understand what they're doing. So you should never be like, that character would never do that, or I don't understand why that character is doing that. I think that there's plenty of characters in history that are fascinating people that are not necessarily likable, or relatable, but I think it is that sense of like of realness, of like, this is a person that I want to know what's going to happen to them and what they're going to do, that makes you want to stay on the journey. What do you think?
Yeah, no, look, I completely agree. One of the things I found interesting as people started reading Sunder City was that so many people, I think, because when you're in point of view of a character, I think whenever you go on a character story, we want to, like, I think the audience often wants to like who they're reading about, and they sometimes do a lot of work that I was somehow surprised at a lot of things where people would be like, "Oh, I really get this." I'm like, "Really? I think he's being a real dick here." But it's like the people are in that world. I also just, I think, yeah, with going on with what you're saying about understanding, you need them to understand them, and I think that is absolutely more important. And I also think most of us don't spend our time going around thinking we're that likable. I don't know, maybe some people are. Like, we understand some part, but they're not usually the things that make me connect with a character of the things they do that is universally like, oh, that's great. It's all the flaws and the mistakes and the things you hope they can learn from. And so I do think that's often, and I'm sure, like, get it in writing, but like as an actor, it's just, you can tell so many scripts that have come out, have gone through that note of going, just make them more likable. And often it means they shave the reality off the characters and shave the things that make them relatable out of it. So you get these like, I think often people make that mistake of thinking like, yeah, that's how we relate to people, is because they're likable or they're cool or they're like who we want to be. And it's great to watch things sometimes that have that wish fulfillment idea, or, and those things. But I'm much more drawn to very flawed people who might be struggling with the things that I'm struggling with.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if everyone likes your character, then it's not a realistic character. It's, because nobody likes everybody. I mean, there's nobody in the world that everyone likes.
No, completely.
There's people who don't like Gandhi and Mother Teresa, I'm sure. So like, if you have a character that everyone thinks is likable, that character is probably flat and not very well drawn. So I like it when readers disagree about whether about a character and can have arguments about that character. That to me feels like a real character.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have a lot of empathy for people who really don't, if they get a bit of the way into my book and they really don't relate to Fetch at all, I'm like, great. You're probably doing things right out there. Like, if you're not, if you're not dealing with the things you're dealing with, fantastic. You're probably not the character for you. Go find the thing that is. But you want to find those people who are going like, who are maybe dealing with some of the things that I explore in the book. And you go, yep, this is for us. This is where we are. If it's not for you, good luck to you. I'm very jealous.
And I think part of the joy of fiction is to be with characters who are not like you, like characters that you don't. I have nothing in common with Fetch. I mean, first of all, I'm not a washed up alcoholic, which is to my credit.
But I'm not either. But some Sunday mornings I get closer.
But that sense of like, there's like a humanity to this person that I want to keep following. Okay, let's go to I'll throw out a question from Daria and about how to transform a collection of little stories, because I think you've said before that sort of the idea for this sorted out as vignettes or like pieces, how to transform that into a book.
For me it was really, I guess, looking at what, because there's easy ways to do it, which is just go like, especially in the detective story, choose where the B story intersects with the A. You go like, okay, that'll take him off there, but that clue might make him realize that's going on, and stitch that together, and it's doable. And I think that's what happens in, a lot of, TV writing and those procedural stuff. And then I guess which is sometimes it can only be done after you've, written some things out, is really understanding, going as deep as you can on what the character's going through, what their big questions are, what the big themes of the story is, and find which elements will go together to really push them through that. That if you go like over the course of this story, you know exactly, like, working out what the journey is that your character's going to go through, how big that arc is, what their essential question is, and put as much pressure on them as possible to force them through that. So that, one of the things I always go to is just like, I select things generally based on how hard, like I just want to make his life as hard as possible.
Right. That's basically our job, right? It's like, how do we make everything worse for our characters?
Yeah, and so it's just trying to go like, okay, at this point, if it is, find the elements there that right then would be the worst thing to happen to them, and lay them on top of each other. So I think that's, I guess, it's very different depending on what kind of story you're writing and what you're piecing together. But I think for me, just find the things that really just like feel like you're compounding the worst things on top of them. How about you? Were there any shorts here that you were, putting together when you
honestly,
any of these started?
The Greenbone Saga books I've described them as just like the biggest Rubik's Cube I have ever tried to solve, because they, by the time the 3 books are done, they'll be well over, they'll be like almost 750,000 words though. And they have a cast of characters. They are going to cover decades of narrative. So it feels very much like this intricate structure that I'm constantly tinkering with and trying to fit all the pieces together. And, it's this ball of thread where all the pieces have to connect. So it's quite the brain strain, I have to say.
I'm sure you've had, I don't know how much you planned before, but those moments where you're just starting the next one, and you go like, oh, this would be great. And it's like, oh no, okay. You have to work out in that one before, did you leave enough pieces there to lead up to this thing?
Right.
Like, you structured the whole thing perfectly, or is it a bit and then find the smaller pieces as you go?
I had a overall vision for the whole trilogy when I started out. And I think that's what helps a lot, is having a sense of what you want this to be at the end. And in my case, I knew that I wanted this to be a family saga. At the end of the day, no matter how many characters, countries, plot points there are, it's the story about this family. So that really helped me to focus. And with the first book, I wanted it to be about the war between these clans on this island. And then my scaffold was in the second book that will become an international conflict. And in the third book, it'll become an intergenerational one. So that was my overall framework. And putting all the pieces together is the hard part, right? So, for example, in the second book, I had to write the second book, Jade War, differently than I wrote Jade City, because I now had characters in different places and multiple storylines going on, where it would have been really hard to write it starting in page 1 and then just write straight through until the end, like I've done with some of my previous novels, because my brain couldn't hold all of that. So I would write several chapters from the point of view of one character, and then several from the point of view of another character, and then figure out how it all stitched together chronologically and thematically, and then go back and do all the dotting the I's and crossing the T's. So
find ways to minimize that character whiplash. What's happening here? What's going there? No, I've made things. I've started out pretty simply for me. They keep just in Fetch's head. A bit of timeline jumping around, but I kept things pretty simple. So yeah, we have a question here actually. I was another one from Mishika going, how do you handle the complexity and scope of writing a multi-generational trilogy in a complex world? That kind of comes.
That one comes. I kind of got that one. Hopefully that answers.
Yes, that's some of the elements. I'm trying to see if there's someone with a question for both of us. Okay, Becky. Who are some contemporary writers that inspire you or make you completely jealous in a good way?
Oh goodness. Okay.
Sorry, that's a tough one. Even as I was reading it, I'm going, yeah.
Thanks a lot, Luke.
Yeah.
Throw that one to me first. Yeah. So I will say one author that I'm really inspired by is Neil Gaiman, and that I will say the reason for that is because everything he writes is a Neil Gaiman story. Like it could be, and he does it across so many different different media types and categories, right? He's written children's novels and adult novels and comics and and television. Like everything he does though is very him, and that's something that I really admire and want to achieve in my own career. Is that I have written YA fiction, I've written adult fantasy, I have ideas in other. I want to write fantasy and science fiction. I've done comics, and I would love at the end of the day, at the end of my whole career, to go back and say like, every one of those was a Fonda Lee story, and so that is something that is very inspirational to me career-wise. How about you?
That's a good one. I want to say, because I always think it all comes from the same place. There's a lot of talk about like genre and medium, and it's like that a lot of that feels like, that comes later. It's finding, knowing where things are driven from, and then having your voice. That's good. I'm just thinking of something recently. I'm just going to go as another Orbit author, Evan Winter, just as someone who makes completely jealous. I just you're reading a Rage of Dragons recently. I was just like, it's great when you read something that feels like so the opposite of what I'm writing right now.
Right.
It's exactly just like it's so full of action and kind of testosterone and blood, and it's just this immediately in this huge world. And I think it's really nice. Well, it's great. Like, when I'm writing Sunder, I'll go back and read some Dashiell Hammett and some Chandler and, and other kind of noir authors where, and like your books where, we're going down some back alleys and people are smoking, and it's like, okay, this is good. And I'm picking things up there, and it's, things are reflecting on my own stuff. And then it's great to just go like, just grab some swords and fight, and chop some people's heads off. And it's just like, this is so good. This is such a relief from the kind of melancholy noir that I'm in at other times. So
yeah. I think sometimes you need to. I really find it harder to read now that I'm a professional author than I used to, because there was a time that books were just for fun, right? But now as an author, when I read books, my brain is always critically looking at them. Like I'm always looking at books and either being like, damn it, they're so good. I'm like, why can't I write like that? Or you're like, that's not the choice I would have made. Or like, they could have edited this, right? Like my brain is always
completely
about words. Well, so it's actually really helpful to read something where I'm like, I could never write this. And so like, I'm fine. Like I can just enjoy it. I was reading, some literary fiction, this novel called H is for Hawk, which is a literary memoir. I will never write anything like that. And so I was able to completely just check out of my writer brain, even though I was still processing words. I could be like, I can just enjoy this because I will never write this. I'll never try to. So I can understand
completely. I also feel like there's also like I get it has to really be kind of things not to work for me to get too critical too, because I know what it takes. Like having written like when writing books and getting it out there, it's so hard to ever click and give anything a not perfect review for me, because I'm just like, screw you. Like anyone else, like, no, this is like, there's so much of them in it, and this, and
Yeah.
you know,
Oh, you realize how hard it is to just even get a book published. So on one hand, I'm more critical, but also more forgiving.
Like, that's right. It's well, and I think with all bits of, with every kind of bit of art, as long as it feels like it's coming from a truthful place, and they're really, and someone's real heart and thoughts and things they're struggling with are going into it, I'm just like, well, that's what this is. And that means more to me often than everything being, all the little perfect edges being there. It's like, no, this is, there's truth in here, and someone has packaged this up and sent this into the world. And you don't need to accept every part of it, but I admire the beauty of that every time I see someone do it in whatever medium. So it's really fun. Yeah, and I guess I'm still in this kind of early stages of being an author, talking to authors and going like, this kind of sharing of ideas and perspectives is that, I don't know, I'm appreciating that every time I get to do it at the moment.
Agreed. All right, I will ask another question from Taylor, which is, what do you consider to be your biggest writing flaw or bad habit?
Look, I've probably got a few, but I think I like, it works both ways, but I do like the musicality. I get kind of caught up in the musicality of the words sometimes, and I like the way things might sound, or the kind of assonance of things, or it does annoy me sometimes if I like, I know I should say this, but that the musicality of that sentence with everything else doesn't seem right, so I it needs an extra syllable or this or that. And I think sometimes that flow, as I think when we all start out writing, like as we find our voice, there is a flow state you can kind of get into. And I think I'd maybe often follow that at the expense of either sense or character or brevity and a lot of other things. So I think that's been a thing from being an early writer to working on more, and having a great editor in Jenny Hill working on the first manuscript, finding those places where to indulge that and follow it, and where to actually go like, okay, let's just do some meat potatoes, here's what's happening, and save that for later. So that's just probably it, getting caught up with my own words when I don't need to. How about you?
I struggle with perfectionism, and not feeling or not having this sense of just freedom to write badly, which is an essential part of the writing process. But there is a part of me that I have to actively fight, which is determined to try and write beautiful, perfect prose, like right out of the gate, and this time my first draft's going to be clean. I know that's not true. Like I've written multiple books now. I know that's not true, but
actually impossible. Yeah,
right. But there is definitely. I mean, I will struggle oftentimes with, and I'm a pretty slow writer. I'm a slow but steady writer generally, but I will see authors who write very quickly, and I'll kind of get caught up with the I should do more, it should be better, it should be faster, it should be easier, and getting caught up in that. So I think for that sense of like overcoming my own standards and having fun is something that I constantly having to make sure that I work on actively.
That just made me think of like another one, which is like how just quickly I can immediately go from like going like, when things are going well, and it's like, and getting to the end and going, okay, no, this is good. And the moment it's like, save it and get it ready to give people, just go like, well, this is the worst thing ever.
Right.
And being able to trust at all that anything that is worth showing anyone is why it's so crucial to have those first readers you can trust, just to do that first thing of going, is it terrible? People you're kind of willing, and it's tough to get people to read stuff. Like it's a big ask to go like, hey, can you read my novel that still isn't perfect yet, but can you just donate a bunch of time just to tell me it's not crap?
Right.
So I think that is probably the thing I really need to work on, is just being able to clear that and analyze my own work after it, but without having to go and get someone else's approval before I know what's working, what isn't. Okay. Let's see. Okay. There's another one from Taylor. How do you select the names of your characters?
Oh, I love naming. I could go on, like how much time do we have? 'Cause, I could talk about naming for a long time.
Right.
That's one part of writing speculative fiction that I really enjoy. It's my jam. I love naming stuff. But with with my characters, I first of all try to kind of think of what's the logic behind the naming in this world. So, obviously in the Greenbone Saga, it's coded East Asian culture. So you've got the family name first, and then I have these long given names that then get shortened as in informal conversation.
Yeah.
And I've got suffixes that are connected to the names to denote like certain respect or status, and then on top of that I think of like the sound of the name. Like I will just write down tons of names and go play with them and try and find the one that feels right for a given character. And then there's sort of the practical aspect of wanting the name to be fairly easy for the reader to remember and not confused with with any other character. So I just had in my recent draft, one of my beta readers was like, you've got like 3 characters on this page that all start with T. And I was like, you're right. Like, I need to change that. Like in real life, I know, whatever, 5 Michaels and 6 Johns, but like in fiction, I've got to make it easier. And then on top of the character names, I have a lot of fun naming the restaurants, the streets, the neighborhoods, the cars, the weapons. I have a lot of that that sort of desire to create specificity in the world. And you can say car, but like if you say Ford Taurus or BMW, like that creates a different level of information. And for me, adding those names into the world creates specificity for the world, and it makes it more immersive. It makes it seem more real to me.
Yeah. No, I could listen to you keep talking about all that all day. We could keep going on. But yeah, for me, because it's similar for me with mine, because once again, we're only hearing Fetch speak. And there's a certain stylistic kind of choice at the beginning that things have to sit in this noirish world with this kind of, I do the audiobook, and for me, like Fetch always had an American accent that kind of fits in there. So it was, for me, a lot of it came with like, okay, what could feel like that world, where if someone hadn't read a lot of fantasy, or if you picked it up, you might not immediately know that this is a fantasy book, until you get to certain elements, that it feels that kind of familiar, which was a big part of it. And is something that feels natural in his head and in his voice, but still has this otherworldly element that each thing also matches the history of each race and how this city came together. So it's nowhere near as intricate as any of the things you're doing, but it's so much for me. It is like, okay, what feels good flowing off Fetch's tongue, but makes sense, so that it can all feel like this is all one guy at a bar telling this story, and we don't have to start saying words that completely break that style.
Right.
Even though not every person and place in this world has come from where he's come from, has the same, had the same language and vocabulary that he has. So a lot of it for me was really just, playing with some other languages. I do a bit of that Google Translate thing where you go, okay, I kind of know what I wanted to represent, but I got to I need to get a bit of distance between it being too literal for me. But a lot of it's just, what sounds good coming off his tongue within the kind of constraints I've given each race and species and everything.
Yeah. I like the phrase that you used, guy in a bar story, because that really kind of encapsulated for me the voice of that book. I kind of imagined like the whole thing as like a black and white, like detective comic book for a lot of it, like that Sam Spade sort of tone to
that
it.
would be the fight if we ever got to make it a TV show or something. Is go like, do we get to do it all black and white? Can the whole thing be, would they let us do that? But no, that's a lot of the things, like, and you have to break it sometimes, but there is a part of the idea that these, for me, that, that story is told fetch wasted in a bar to someone he thinks he's really close to, just like, and this is his, he's going through, and this is how he'd say that story, and not doing anything that too much breaks that idea of where he is and what's going on in his head. He can't get too aware, or about what's really going on, and it all that through that black and white nostalgic haze.
Here's a question from Setsu. Was there anything cut out of the book that you loved, and how did you make that choice? And was there anything included in the books that you had to fight for?
There's definitely. So it's interesting. The flashbacks really went in and out of that first book a bit. And that was partly because there are two versions of it. There's something that sticks very much in that a kind of Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler story that happens to take place in a fantasy world, but where we could have buried a lot of those bigger elements further back. That becomes origin story. Those flashbacks are just origin story later on. I think it was a little bit about then being with Orbit and going like, oh, people are going to pick this up expecting a fantasy book, and that comes with certain other obligations and expectations. So I already had them written, and I kind of was deciding how they fit in. Do they fit into this book? Is it later? And then when the decision was to put them in there, but in that kind of format where we just cut to each one as we go through each tattoo, they kind of, some serious trimming needed to happen there to go like, okay, we want to sink into this, but not too much. And there are definitely some elements from that had to be changed for brevity and sense, elements that will pay off later. But maybe if that was just its own origin story, there'd be a lot more little breadcrumbs there and things that I would have had a chance to lay. And one particular kind of like emotional moment, but that I know where it'll come later, but it's just something that you're like, you suddenly go like, oh, it was great when this had happened, and now I've got to throw that back to some other time. So for me, I think in the first, and I kind of don't mind that. I kind of like how the flashbacks are in there, but there is still a part of me that goes like, oh, would it, in a different version could have really just indulged in those moments a little bit more.
The nice thing about those sorts of pieces that get cut is like you can always like release them as extras to fans, or like you store it away and then
there's a good old folder of,
especially if you've got a long running series, nothing dies, right? Everything just goes back into the writer drawer, into
the world. That's it. I do like to think I'm kind of leaving a gap between book 2 and book 3. And I've got a couple of ideas, actually. There are a few gaps in the story where Fetch is doing cases, that we know he's been doing it for a bit before the first book. And, there's a bit of a gap between book 1 and 2, but a bigger one between 2 and 3. And it's like, oh yeah, there's plenty of time there to like, if there's some little interaction that needs its own thing, there'll be room later on to just do some little individual Fetch out on the street adventures.
Right. Yeah. In my case, there was something that I cut, not in the, it wasn't that my editor made me cut it, but I cut it in revision. It wasn't in Jade War. I think it was with Jade City, where there was a whole like side story about this minor clan that got destroyed and annexed. And I had written it out as kind of like a way of building into kind of one of the characters' decisions and his realization that the rival clan, the Mountain Clan, was a threat to them. So I had written out this whole scene of this minor clan being destroyed and like going to the Nopi clan, the main characters, for help. And then I realized, like, back to my original vision of like what this story is about, and the main spine of this story being the story of this family. I came to that, like, you know what, this is not part of the main spine. So there's always this sort of this filter that I'm putting over the story of like, does this advance the main storyline? Is this does this need to be in a scene, or is it exposition, or is it backstory? So that little scene got turned into like 3 lines, where like the character's like reminiscing on something that had happened, and it's piece thinking about something differently. So
did that involve another POV character, or was it
no, it was still one of the main POV characters, but it would have been kind of like a side quest journey flashback kind of thing. But sometimes it goes the opposite way. Sometimes it's something that is like something where I realize, like, okay, no, we actually need to flesh that out and put that on the page and not just handle it in passing. So it definitely goes either way. I think I've said this before, that sometimes writers have this impression that editors are just going to cut your book. Like, they're just going to go in and hack and chop at it. But that's not their job at all. In fact, like, most of the time, my manuscripts gain words in the process of revision. There's some stuff that gets trimmed or cut out, but most of the time it gets fleshed out in some way.
And they're the greatest notes. It's fantastic. Like, it's fantastic going like, okay, when it's like, I want to know more about this. Or, it's like, but what does that mean? It's like, oh, great, I've got it. I've got that ready to go. That it is often easier and more fun than the, we don't need this, which is often right, but just takes, and that takes a bit more digesting and acceptance than can you write a little more, which tends to come easier. All right. Another one here from Denise. Has writing taught you anything for your daily life? Something that you discovered about yourself that you weren't aware before?
Oh, gosh. I have realized, I think, that, so before I was a writer, I thought I'm going to suck at working from home because, there's snacks and television. Like, there's all this stuff that's going to really distract me. And I don't know if I can do it. And I also worried that it would be lonely. And I thought, oh gosh, like, I'm going to miss people from the office. And fortunately, neither of those has turned out to be true. For me, I think I would have guessed that I would have been more of like a night writer. But because of like the schedule of my family, that's just not really possible. So I've learned, one of the things I guess that it has taught me is that I need to protect my writing time, and that and it's taught me kind of tools to do that. And in fact, when I started writing, I wasn't a full-time writer. I had a day job, and I had children, and I didn't have that much time to write. So I would be like, okay, I have 1.5 hours to sit in the car, during my kids' sports practice so I can get writing done. And I was oftentimes more productive during those periods than, now I've got most of the day, and it's easy for it to get frittered away, especially at a time like this when there's, there's so many distractions. So, so I have to create like little tricks to bind my time so that I can be productive at home. And it's given me a little bit more just awareness, I guess, of like my own creative flow. Like, there's days when I'm like, you know what, I cannot write new words today Like the brain is just not there. So I'm going to do this piece of research that I've been meaning to do, or I'm going to write that blog post that my publicist asked me to do. Today's going to be the day to do that. Or, actually I have the energy to tackle this today. So it's made me, I guess, more cognizant of my own energy, like creative energy.
Yeah. I think I'm very similar in the way, and this was something I was going to say in that, when you're creatively suffering in this time, before I got distracted by the echo, which I'd managed to fix, which is nice. But was that it is great giving those little bursts and going, okay, even if it's just whether it's half an hour, 2 hours, just go like, okay, I'm going into it now, internet off, focus for this time. And often that can be, and if you know that like, that's all you're maybe going to be able to do, that's enough. And for me, I know that, like the first couple of hours of the day are my best. Like it's when I'll think clearer. It's when I'll second guess myself less. And ideally I want to put that into writing new stuff. It can also, like, that's often where I'll like be better at just sending emails. I don't know, but like as the day goes on, some of it just gets messy. Like by the end of the day, you're going like, oh, it's just, it just gets cloudier. Meditation has been helping, but still those first couple of hours are crucial. So for me too, it's like, if I know there's things I got to get done, wake up, do them. Yeah. And be able to then let yourself off the hook. If you don't do the billion other things you should, just go like, okay, those first couple of hours, do the really important stuff, or like get really ahead on the manuscript. So it's like, and then after that, hey, maybe you do have the days where you write for 10 hours, but at least harnessing that. But from what was the things to learn about yourself? I think for me, it was one of the things was just like when you go like the realization and recognition that those weird thoughts in my head that you're not sure if everyone else will understand or not. People do. And it's like, it's just so rewarding every time someone like, screenshots, a particular line of dialogue or, or sends something through and just like, or says how much it speaks to them, or that like just how it resonates. And I think that, because you don't know before, I've been in the creative industries for a while, a lot of the time saying other people's lines, but you're putting parts of you into it. But it's, It was nice with this to go like, there's just so much of crap from my head poured onto the page here. And it was just really nice to go like, okay, I have something to say.
Here's a question.
Which we all do, but yeah. Sorry, go.
Oh no. Here's a question from Breet. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Have you ever written a villain that you liked or sympathized with more than the main character? Which is an interesting question for you, because in many ways, Fetch is kind of an anti-hero. So, he could be, he's done things, in his life.
Without getting into too much spoilers here or like revealing, too much about what I know, it's like definitely a lot of times I think Fetch is, I definitely going to be more interested going forward with most people that my villains, there's nothing to be gained really from putting any villains in my books that maybe you don't go like, are they more right about things than Fetch is? That's kind of because he's the one that needs to work on stuff. So and we got to, that it only is going to work. And I think that's it in everything. It's the question's only interesting if we have, the hero's question is only interesting if it's faced with an actual believable other side, or, if you want to change their ideas and their thoughts, you have to present another option. Something that is just as plausible, maybe more plausible, or, ideally, the hero learns something from the villain. Maybe if their action, the way they're going about it isn't right, but the ideas need to both potentially be the right one is where things are most interesting. So, one of my favorite things to write are people tearing Fetch down or schooling him on something. So any antagonist I bring in front of him, I really come from a point of, that they're probably right about whatever they're saying, but then find as many conflicts within that. So, and I mean, I don't want to give any spoilers for book 2, but that's, it's that kind of, a lot of it sits right at the very heart of that question. But can't say much yet.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
same with yours as well. Like everyone's morally grey in your books. It
Yeah.
really doesn't feel like we're with No Peak against the mountain because we happen to be with their point of view. But it doesn't feel like it's ever really presented in any way that like there's a philosophical or moral superiority for heroes to villains.
Yeah. And I don't tend to write heroes and villains. I even, well, in the Greenbone Saga books, the villain, Aitmata, has a pretty strong fan base. I've definitely heard from readers who are fans of her because in many ways she's a very admirable character. I mean, she's risen to the top in a world that is where she was disadvantaged and not given a fair shake in many ways. And she's really a visionary. Like she has a very clear idea of what's the right thing. And it's not like she's she's doing it out of malice or spite or a lot of, I think, female villains are presented as being villainous because they were treated badly, especially by men. It's like, oh, they're that way because they've suffered in their life. But that's not with Aitmata. She has this clear sense of what's the right thing for her clan and her country, and it just so happens that it means destroying our protagonists. So, you can see her point.
And most of the argument we hear from them is personal rather than, it's not a lot of time is spent going, well, this is why it's actually wrong about this in a moral way. It's, it's, we hear that equally on both sides, and it's much more in the personal lives of the people who disagree.
Yeah. They're trying to survive. And so there is, I'd like to think that any story I write could be flipped and told from the point of view of the antagonist, and you would get just as good a story or just as sympathetic a point of view as the story I did write.
Absolutely. I feel like maybe more sympathetic in my case with the other characters. It wouldn't be doing exactly the same thing, but yeah. Okay.
Oh, we're being told that we have time for maybe one or two more questions.
Oh, sorry.
We've just gotten the chat notification that we have time for one or two more questions.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll see what we can rip through.
I know, right?
Yeah,
I don't think we're going to get through all 26. So, first of all, thank you to everyone who submitted questions. We could have gone on for a very long time.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll maybe we'll get a chance to do it again, but we'll do a couple more. Hopefully your experience has been positive, but when it's not, how do you handle negative criticism of your work? Hiding under a rock is a totally valid answer.
The thing about being a professional writer is you take this thing that is in many ways it's very personal, and you're like, here, world, like, here's my heart on a platter. Go ahead and stab it. So there is a skill that you have to develop as an author, and I don't want to necessarily call it thick skin, because I think that maybe simplifies it a little bit. Because in a way you don't want to be like, nothing. As writers, I think we are sensitive, to criticisms and to reactions to our work. So you don't want to be like, I'm totally like I'm made of adamantium. But you do have to realize, I think, that it's no longer your book once it's out in the world. And that's something that's hard to do. And you kind of get better at it with practice, the more books you put out, I suppose. But once it's published and it's out in the world, the reader brings as much to that experience as you do. And you don't control how the reader is going to engage with it. You don't know if they're going to read it on a bad day, if they're going to read it while they're in the bathroom, if they are going to read your character and be reminded of their horrible ex. Whatever it is that they bring to it, you don't control that. All you can control is what you've put on the page, and you can tell your truth as accurately as you can. But you have to realize that, the criticism or negative feedback that you get is as much about that person who's giving it as it is about you. And also just realize that, like, there is no work of art out there that is going to be immune. Like, no one is going to like everything. It's impossible. So trying to write something that everyone will like is impossible and just folly. So there's that element of, like, okay, like I understand that there's going to be negative reactions, and I know it's not all about me, and that it's inevitable, and my job is to just plow forward anyways, to keep putting down what feels right to me.
Yeah, I mean, I second all of that. And then the other thing is just to say, like, you don't have to engage or even look at it, and just be very good at knowing when it's good for you to do. Yes. Like, there are times, it's interesting, when I act in stuff, I kind of want to know it all. It was a bit of a control freak thing in me. Like, I hate the idea of other people knowing things that I don't. So if you're like in a show or something and any reviews are out there, it's like, hey, even if it's terrible, I want to know, because I don't want to be in that awkward thing where someone's like, oh, so yeah, that review. You're like, what was it? What do you know that I don't? Like, it was a weird control thing. And then, at a certain point with this, it is so close. And we're the only one driving our engines, really. We have to, from nowhere, make more of this stuff. And you've got to be very aware of, there are some times when it's like, if you're feeling a little fragile, stay well away from any of that. Because the truth is, as well, if you can read a review that says everything is amazing, but if there's one little comment in there that says, like, oh, but this could be worked, or I didn't particularly like this, or that were a bit, that's all you'll focus on. That can, on the wrong day, that'll stop you from doing anything else. So it's just knowing in yourself, being really honest with yourself about whether you're in a place where reading criticism of your work is going to be helpful or damaging to what you're doing and what you have to do. And more often than not, focus on doing the next thing and working. But it is, on the good days, you can take in all those disclaimers of understanding that lots of people, when they open that first page, even from then, you go, people's expectations you already are so different going in that what they think. I do find it interesting where I've got some reviews where you see people go, like, assuming what I was trying to do, and that's always really interesting, where you go, like, oh, but because they expected something, they were able to pull certain things out, going, oh, but this and that. It's like, that's not what I was trying. Someone goes off, which then you go, okay, technically, maybe I need to flag a couple of things, or maybe make things a bit more obvious that I'm not actually trying to write what they might have, the thing that I'm trying to play against. Anyway, that thing of just knowing, like, there are things to be learned from there sometimes, but it's often not exactly what's being said. So you need to be able to go in with it, being discerning and kind to yourself. Otherwise, forget about it and just write more stuff and give it to the people who like it. Yeah.
I mean, I will say, it also is just, I guess, getting used to it. Like, I remember, when my first book came out, like, at first, a bad review would make me feel bad for a while. Now it's like, there's a certain amount of getting used to it, and also just like blocking the sites, so I can't look at them anymore. Like, I blocked Goodreads years ago. I have not regretted that decision.
Good. I was wondering about that one, because that's one that, like, it fluctuates in weird ways, and also you go, okay, that's good to probably stay clear of that one.
And also I think remembering that, like, reviews aren't for you. Reviews are for other readers. And so if there's a bad review and it says, here's what I really didn't like about the book, and that helps another reader say, hey, that's exactly what I want in a book, or you're right, like I don't want that either. That's good for those readers. Like you're not meant to read those reviews. And so that I think helps with the whole like getting your ego too wrapped up with reaction to your work. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's do one more question. We'll do one more, and then we'll call it a night. We could keep going, but we'll do one more. All right. So here's a good one to end. So this question is from Of Books and Coffee, and it is: your books are touching on very complex issues and are asking difficult questions. And with the way things are you tempted to write just pure escapism stories to relieve the potential compassion fatigue, or are you determined to keep asking questions and exploring the subjects?
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird when people talk about complete escapism, and I'm not sure if it actually exists. It's whether I don't know I'm not interested, or I don't know if it actually exists. I don't know if there's anything that's about nothing, really, that isn't created from some question, some feeling. And it can be as simple as celebrating, some positive feeling you have. But there's still going to be, for someone to go through, for someone to do it, creating anything takes a lot of work, even as disposable as it might feel at the end. And look, it does exist out there. There are some things made by committee that, that at the end you go like, no one's really creating this. This is now happening because money is being pushed through a thing, and so people are employed. But I still think even in that, like, things shine through. People's thoughts and feelings and passions come through. It doesn't mean it has to be at the forefront, and it's generally not the job of, with most art and entertainment, it should have some capsule around it, a bit of sugar on the medicine to, that's the fun of it. That's the kind of the point in some ways, but it has to be about something. And I think, so I mean, I don't feel, it's not that I feel any obligation to try and solve the world's problems through stuff I'm doing now, or to avoid it completely and offer an alternative. But I think it's more with everything I'm doing. Yeah, I guess it's definitely, there is a part of me that's making sure that, I guess, just being honest with my own mind and honest with what's happening out in the world, and make sure I'm, first of all, not just following through with something I was planning to write before and going like, okay, now with all this conversation that's happening, is any of this actually, are things starting to feel dated, or are things maybe feeling, are there any tone deaf things in there? Because I think we're all learning a lot right now. So it's making sure we're not have I learned anything that could make this richer? Anything I can put in here? Is there anything I'm thinking about now that would enrich what's the story I was already wanting to tell? Or is it, that thing of going like, actually, this thing doesn't interest me anymore. It was, I'm sure there are a lot of things that might have felt like an interesting conversation a month ago that actually go like, oh, that conversation's like, people are setting fire to that conversation in the streets right now. Like, there's a little subtle take on, whether it's race or whatever. Like, it's like, no, okay, that particular conversation somewhere else. But I'm sure the personal elements are still there. So yeah, I think it's still a lot of the reason when you start writing stuff, it becomes about the plot and the characters, and these elements do take over. But I don't think you should ever intentionally draw away from the kernels of real truth and philosophy in there, or necessarily feel like you need to slap that on top of something else because it feels relevant.
Right. Yeah. My answer to this question, if the question is, escapism or dealing with issues, is that GIF. That's just both.
Yeah.
Both is good, right? Like, that's how I feel. I feel like, that you can do both. You can be escapist and entertaining, and you can ask tough questions and explore subjects. That's what I hope happens with my novels, because on the surface level, my story is about magic gangsters. It's got like cool martial arts and stuff, but it's also, I hope, a lot about family and globalization and modernization, colonialism, and the duty to oneself versus greater society. Like, I hope it's all of that as well. So there's, I think that's like a false dichotomy, if you will, of you can, the way to deal with tough questions is often to escape and tackle them in a different context. I think so. One of my favorite movies is Mad Max Fury Road. You would say like that is a hugely escapist film. It's just one ginormous car chase, but it also has these significantly heavy themes and subject matter behind it, including the empowerment of women and ecological degradation and things like that. So I think there's to me, the holy grail is like, I want a book that is fun and entertaining and that will keep readers flipping the pages, but they're going to come away with it and I'm going to sneak in all those heavy subjects in there too,
Yeah, that it might not be till they're walking around or seeing something and it just like the feeling of something in the world resonates back in the book, or they've realized that they now see something differently because of something they experienced in there without feeling like they were hit over the head at the time. Absolutely.
Well, it looks like we've got, we have been cued to finish up with one book recommendation each and then say what's next for us. Okay, you go first.
Okay.
Luke.
Oh, okay. Like I just want to recommend your books, but most of the people here, it looks like
I was like, I can't even cheat.
Yeah. What? It's the cliche that I took to other authors to say it's one of the hardest questions that comes out. I'm gonna go. This is weird. I just partly because I saw it, but also just because it's worth doing again. I said like the A.A. Milne's When We Were Very Young and Now We Are Six, because it doesn't have to be a new book recommendation. No, I was reading it recently. I had to read some kids' stories for a thing. I wanted to do this, but we couldn't get the rights. I just think like sometimes some nonsense is really good at breaking through, and some nostalgia, but also just absolute absurdity can be the thing that breaks through when the world seems too serious. So I'm going to say I'm just going to go read some A.A. Milne. When we were very young, now we are six. It's just rhymes and nonsense.
I that was a favorite in my family when my kids were around 6.
Yeah. It's just like it's amazing how often those rhymes come back in my head. I know that's not really helping out any other authors or anything, but that's what I saw. And what is next for me? The sequel to Last Mile in Sunder City, Dead Man in a Ditch, is coming out like September and October around the world this year. I think, I mean, who knows what's happening this year, but that's the plan anyway. Yeah. So that's the next one. Over to you.
Do you know how many books it's going to be at this point?
Well, yeah, I have my plan. We're not, there's a lot of kind of parts of it, but I think there's going to be, my plan is 4 in this first part, like kind of each of them that kind of take place in a different season. And that'll kind of be the main chunk of Fetch's story.
Cool. So, oh gosh, book recommendation. This question comes up every time, and every time I'm like, draw a blank because the most recent book I read was yours. But let's see. Okay, so I'm going to go also a little sideways and say like one of the things that I have been enjoying is just getting into graphic novels and manga, and that's also a way for me to enjoy narrative without getting.
I'm just going to quickly point out it's not an extensive collection up there yet, but the manga goes to the top.
So recently I got into this manga called Way of the House Husband, which is hilarious. Okay. It is just this kind of like cozy comedy about a former Yakuza gangster who's this real badass, but he quits the life to become a house husband to his career wife. And it is so for anyone who's a fan of the Greenbone Saga books and wants more like Asian gangsters, but in a very, very lighthearted way, that's where to go. So I'm enjoyed that. And
I'm getting that.
I just think of it as like an AU to some of the characters. And then next
Perfect.
for me, I mean, I've got my head down working on the third and final volume of the Greenbone Saga, Jade Legacy, which will be out next year. And then after that, I've got some other projects lined up that are not official yet, and so I'm not going to talk about them yet. So yes.
Exciting. Great.
All right. So I think that's it for us. We could have
Yeah,
gone.
I think we've gone over. We could keep going, but I think we'll let you get on with your day. But
apologies to those whose questions we did not get to. This would be a 10-hour thing if we tried to get to all of them. But
yeah,
but
I think a lot of our answers overlapped a few.
Hopefully.
Anyway. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone. Thank you, Fonda.
Yes.
Great to chat with you.
You too, Luke. Take care.
All right.
Bye.
See you.